the sustainability coordinator for the Marine Climate and Energy Partnership. I've been doing that for a number of years now. We do greenhouse gas emissions inventories every year for our jurisdictions. We also work on climate action plans. We have a template that we've been using and updating all the plans for all of our jurisdictions, and they're almost all done. Right now I'm working on the ones for Tiburon and Mill Valley, and I think there's only a couple more to update after that. So, and by updating, I mean to address the 2030 and 2045 statewide goals for greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So one of the important things we've been working on is this EV acceleration strategy. Let me share my screen, and I've got a short presentation for you. Okay, I'm going to assume everybody can see that just fine.
Yes.
Very good, thank you. So again, the EV acceleration strategy has been created by the Marine Climate and Energy Partnership, and this was funded through the Transportation Authority of Marin's Alternative Fuel Program. We're very grateful for their support. The goal of the plan was to accelerate EV adoption to meet the targets set in our jurisdiction's climate action plan. Some of our jurisdictions have pretty aggressive EV adoption targets in order to meet their overall GHG reduction goals. And I have a slide that outlines those. And so we've developed this strategy, and our intent is that the strategy will be adopted or accepted by all of the jurisdictions in Marin County and kind of help to coordinate action and just some overall overarching strategies that we feel are really important in order to meet our goals. So our process was, we started at MCEP. There was a subcommittee that was formed. We worked on this plan for over a year. We started by developing some guiding principles, which I'll go over on the next slide. Then we conducted pretty robust outreach to all of our stakeholders. So that included meeting with the jurisdiction staff and their public works departments. Also, we met with a number of community leaders and nonprofits, state agencies. What we wanted to do is really understand the barriers and the challenges to widespread EV adoption so that we could then create our actions in order to address those barriers. We also did an extensive literature review where we reviewed other agencies' plans from like regional and state agencies. So these are the guiding principles. They're in the plan, actually in the appendix. Again, we wanted to support and align with our local climate action plans. Equity was a very important part of the plan. And we wanted this plan to achieve county-wide consistency and cost effectiveness. We certainly want to track and measure our actions as well as the overall adoption rates, which we can do pretty easily now with the state has made some EV adoption by jurisdictions, by zip codes actually, and by counties accessible. And then we wanted to be able to kind of focus our government actions on the most efficient use of public funds. We want to support and leverage regional, state, and federal funding, and just support acceleration of EV sales and charger installations by the private market. This is a look at our existing conditions. This chart is actually, this is new 2020 data because we just are finishing up our greenhouse gas emissions data. The data that's in the plan is 2019, so we'll be updating that before we actually adopt the plan. But similar to the 2019 data, transportation emissions are they're over half of our countywide emissions, and that is the way we count. And I can go into a long explanation about the way we count emissions, but we're looking at activity-based emissions, where this is not life cycle or consumption-based emissions. And then on the right, the chart there is showing where the emissions are coming by vehicle type. So 80% of emissions come from passenger vehicles. So obviously it's really critical that we address this part of the passenger vehicles in the transportation sector if we're going to meet our overall goals. This is a look at ZV adoption rates. Big jump. The green is what was added in that year. So there was a big jump in 2021. We probably could have even done better if we weren't having so many supply chain issues with ZEVs. ZEVs, for those of you who may not be familiar with the concept, but they include all battery electric as well as plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles, which we have very few of here in Marin. About 2/3 of these ZEVs in Marin are electric vehicles. And the plan covers both, it's not really talking about fuel cell electric vehicles, but we are covering both battery and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. The chart on the right is showing the emissions, the EV adoptions by zip code, or it's by jurisdiction, but it's by zip code. So it can include some unincorporated areas in these zip codes. That's the way that the data is presented to us. So countywide, by the end of 2021, we were at almost 6% of registered passenger vehicles were ZEVs. That exceeds the statewide average of 2.8%. We're actually the second highest EV rate. EVs per capita in the county, in the state, just behind Santa Clara County. Another interesting thing is just to look at the adoption rates by jurisdiction. So probably what you would expect, the highest adoption rates are in the most affluent communities, Belvedere and Tiburon, which shares the zip code. That's why they have the same rate, and Ross, and the lowest are like Novato. So that's pretty typical, especially with EVs being more expensive, at least at this point, than their counterpart internal combustion engine vehicles. These are the GHG reduction and ZEV targets for the various jurisdictions, and they range from 25% all the way up to 45%, which is what the County of Marin's target is for ZEV adoption. The city of Mill Valley is working on their plan, but we've kind of settled on 35%, and it looks like Tiburon is going to be going for 45% because they're going for a 50% below 1990 level GHG reduction overall. The interesting thing about these rates is that they're not rates for just the jurisdiction. They're what they hope to achieve countywide. So that's kind of an interesting wrinkle in how the calculations are done. This chart here is looking at what our projected Marin ZEV population. So if we're going for a 35% target, this is how the annual growth rate would need to average 20, it's been averaging 21% over the past 3 years. And we would need to sustain that 21% annual growth rate to get to a 35% adoption rate by 2030. Usually, as you're ramping up a market, it's a lot easier to achieve 21% growth rates. When your numbers are small, it gets a lot harder when your numbers grow larger. But that's what we would need to do to get to 35% target. And then the chart on the right here is showing you, this is looking at what the new Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule is setting. So this is to achieve 100% ZEV sales by the year 2035. And they've actually set some goals beginning in 2026 for ZEV adoption. So I've charted that out. So that's in the orange line there. And so the assumption would be they would be at 68% by 2030. And then I'm looking at what the ZEV registrations would have to be to exceed these state targets. So our registrations, in order to achieve that 35% adoption rate, we're actually looking at ZEV registrations that exceed the statewide target. So even with that support from the state government with this new legislation, we're still going beyond what the statewide goals are. And then these are the EV charging needs. We're existing and our future needs according to some statewide information, some studies that have been done. Right now, we have about 740 public chargers, and public chargers are those that are publicly accessible, and then private chargers are 25%. So undoubtedly, the number of single-family home chargers is much higher. than what is shown here, just because we know from, in order to support the number of EVs that are on the road in Marin County, we have to have a lot of single family home chargers. 71% of our housing units in Marin are single family homes. So that market, as long as we can support EV purchases and kind of hope to streamline that process of installing your own charger, that market is a little easier to address. The greatest need here really is going to be for shared private chargers in multifamily buildings and workplaces. And we know that it can be very difficult to retrofit those multifamily buildings so that they have EV capable spaces for their tenants and property owners. There was, TAM did an EV charging siting plan back in 2019 and identified places where we need level 2 chargers, also some where there are level 3 chargers needed. Probably not very surprising, but along the frontage roads, of course, in high use areas like shopping centers, school parking lots, smart stations and ferry terminals are good places. Any place where somebody parks for a long time and can park their car. And also looking at the Marin City and Current Canal neighborhood to support equitable EV access and adoption. This was done in 2019, and we've made a lot of progress on installing EV chargers. I know I see a lot more in the public parking lots in Nevada, where I live. And then this finally is a chart showing where we have EVs in our municipal fleets. This was at least at the point in time when we drafted the plan. And what really jumps out here is that passenger cars are easy to convert to EVs at this point. And these are typically passenger cars that are being used for site visits, for inspections, for meetings, or commuter cars. But our jurisdictions have a lot of special purpose and special duty vehicles, public works trucks, police vehicles, fire trucks. These are all a lot more difficult to change over to electric vehicles. But there are electric street sweepers now, and presumably over the next 8 years, we're going to see a lot more variety of kind of these public special purpose vehicles that we need. The Ford F-150 will help to really replace a number of vehicles in our public works department's fleets. So the plan identifies and summarizes these barriers to EV adoption, some of them which I've already kind of discussed when going over the existing conditions. Along the vehicle technology range, we have barriers just around EV range, concerns about battery degradation, a lack of diversity in vehicle types, which I just talked about, and just vehicle availability. Some of these are kind of beginning to work themselves out. We are having a lot more vehicle types coming on the market. The EV ranges are getting longer. So this is something that will probably be addressed by the private market, by the vehicle manufacturers, especially when California sets these goals to have 100% EV sales only in 2035. So the manufacturers really have to kind of ramp up the availability and types of EVs. For charging barriers, there still really are not enough publicly accessible charging locations. There are barriers along the cost to install trenching, also cost to upgrade electrical panels and install level 2 chargers at home. Concerns about low grid capacity, connectivity. Sometimes if you need to install a transformer, that can be prohibitively expensive to get like a level 3 or a whole bank of level 2 chargers at the site. There's not enough wayfinding signage for EV charging locations. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's just the difficulty in retrofitting existing multifamily buildings is definitely a barrier. And finally, reliability of public chargers is something that we've had a lot more kind of transparency around this issue as of late. The economics of EVs, as I mentioned, initially a higher purchase price or lease price compared to the ICE vehicles. That is expected to come down. I think the latest that I've seen studies for, or projections, is that by 2024 we'll achieve initial cost parity. Of course, we do know that the cost of ownership of EV over time is cheaper than, and especially now with the cost of fuel being so high. Another issues are just complicated incentives for vehicles and EV charges, especially when you're layering different incentives on top of each other. And then the revenue from these public EV chargers, if the city or town is installing them, the revenue they get just doesn't cover the cost of the subscription, the maintenance, the electricity, the depreciation. So that's a real concern for our jurisdictions who have very limited budgets. So they really need to look at other kind of different kinds of arrangements that they can make with third-party vendors in order to get EVs in their public parking lots. And then finally, other barriers are just perceptions and behavior. And some of these aren't necessarily real, but there's a lot of misinformation out there, just resistance to change, fear of the unknown, lack of knowledge, especially at the car dealerships and with the car salespeople. It's much easier for them to sell what they already know and have been doing for a long time. So the EV strategy itself has 35 actions. We've put these into 4 different areas. Our expectation here is that each jurisdiction, when we bring the plan to them, the strategy to them to present it, that they will identify specific actions and prioritize those actions. So they're actions that are relevant to their community. It can be very different for Belvedere compared to San Rafael, for example. And we've included a work plan at the back of in the appendix in order to provide a sample for the jurisdictions to use. And they can develop this work plan and bring that forward when we bring the strategy to the councils for adoption, or the council may want to kind of help to guide the identification of which strategies they want to prioritize, and then give direction to staff to come back with a completed work plan in order to implement the strategy. So one of the first area is to conduct community outreach and education. And so this is, conducting and supporting marketing campaigns and also promoting rebates and incentives. There are new rebates and incentives, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act. There's now a $4,000 consumer tax credit for lower and middle income individuals to buy used clean vehicles, and also up to $7,500 tax credit to buy new clean vehicles. So, we can help to promote those rebates, as well as other rebates that might be available, other incentives. The cities and towns can do a lot of outreach and education. They can utilize their own town and city newsletters. A lot of these have very good outreach or very good circulation and high open rates as well. And they also have social media. They might be active on Facebook or Instagram and next door, using traditional media, also their websites, and then supporting webinars and local events. And then the next one is to accelerate public charging infrastructure. We have 15 actions under this area. One is to develop a model reach code. You'll be hearing from Brian Reyes, and he can talk about the EV reach code, but there really is an opportunity to go beyond what the state code is and to go and adopt either tier 1 or tier 2, which would be much more help in supporting our higher EV adoption rates. We also have the actions around really identifying EV charging needs, both for public charging and for municipal fleet charging, and then to integrate those needs and really put them into our capital improvement plan so that they're identified and really ready to go. And we have actions that prioritize municipal investment in frequently used properties. So that would be things like community centers. Also, any public parking lot that's near multifamily buildings, so those tenants can perhaps go and charge their vehicles and then return to their buildings to park. And then we also have actions around e-bike facilities, especially storage and secure storage for e-bikes. We think that there's a big promise here for e-bikes, but because they are so expensive and they get stolen very easily, we really do need to have a lot of secure storage so that people are feel comfortable taking their bikes to run their errands and do their shopping locally, and can feel pretty comfortable that their bike will still be there when they return afterwards. In the third area, which is to increase municipal fleet electrification, we have strategies around identifying fleet replacement. So our goal here is to convert 100% of the fleet to EVs by 2030, but we really do need to have more concrete actions in the strategies to identify which ones and to make this happen, to really implement it, and also to provide chargers. But again, chargers both publicly available, but they need to plan to have sufficient charging capability to support 100% EV fleet by 2030. And then finally, our last area is around supporting and advocating for policy and funding that accelerates EV adoption. So we need additional funding for our municipal needs, and also additional funding to support equity priority communities. And again, this is another area where the Inflation Reduction Act might provide some more funding. And so we'll be looking at that more closely and leveraging any federal and state money that becomes available in order to implement plans. So next steps, we are going to community groups like this group here, other sustainability commissions, committees, climate action committees. And so we're taking our presentation around Marin to anybody who is interested in receiving one. And we have the plan. It's on our website. It's at this link here. You can go to marinclimate.org, and the link is right on the front page. And so if you'd like to provide any comments today, or to provide additional comments or suggestions, recommendations for editing or revising the plan, we're more than happy to receive those. Once we get our feedback, we're looking probably to wrap up getting community input by the end of October. We're going to then revise the strategy, and then we're going to bring this to the cities and towns for acceptance. This is winter. It may not happen actually, well, this winter. Yeah, we're probably looking at January. We know there's a lot happening on our council's agendas for the rest of the year. There's the model code the REACH model code, which is a very high priority. Also, housing elements are being adopted. And so it may be January, February, where there's actually time on our council's agendas to kind of give a good look at the EV acceleration strategy. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Derek McGill from the Transportation Authority of Marin is also on this call, so he can answer questions, and would love to take any feedback. I'm going to stop sharing my presentation at this point. If you have any specific questions about a slide, I'm happy to bring that back to you as well.
So thank you so much, Christine, for your presentation and all your work on this. I think what we're going to wind up doing is hearing some brief comments from Carleen Cullen, and then from Ride and Drive Clean and Cool the Earth, and then Derek McGill, if he wants to make comments. He's from Transportation Authority of Marin. So why don't we do that, and I'll start off with you, Carleen.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. As Bob mentioned, I'm Carleen Cullen. I'm the founder and executive director for Cool the Earth. And we have a Marin and Bay Area-wide campaign to accelerate EV adoption. We work with tens of thousands of drivers now and offer a number of educational programs for people in single-family homes, as well as those in multifamily. In our equity communities, we're doing a lot of work outside of Marin in our equity communities. We'd like to do some in Marin as well, but need to get funding for that. So I just wanted to start off at the very top level. Lots of change since this plan was written. So thank you to Christine for this great starting document. There's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which included $7.5 billion for EV charging infrastructure. So we're very happy about that. It's a fraction of what we need. That's at federal level. $5 billion is for infrastructure along highways and corridors, and $2.5 billion is for community charging. There's also great changes, well, many changes, I should say, in the Inflation Reduction Act that's also affecting EV incentives. So more about that, I think, at the next meeting. And significantly, California legislature has passed $10 billion to accelerate the EV adoption as well, including infrastructure and many other segments. We've been working deeply on reliability and usability of the charging infrastructure at the state and federal levels. I've been invited to Washington, D.C. I've spoken before the Department of Transportation, have been speaking at many conferences nationally. So we're really deeply involved in the industry, both at the state and federal level. And then the last background I'll give is that Congressman Huffman has nominated me to the federal EV working group, the new EV working group on charging infrastructure. So that's in the works right now. And he also asked me several months ago to start to develop a strategy and tactics about how we as Marin County might take advantage of the $2.5 billion that's in the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, that's for community funding. So I've developed a task force with the two sustainability officers in San Rafael and Novato, as well as working with two elected officials, one from each city, and have a task force also that includes the Canal Alliance, North Bay Community Services, and West Marin Climate Action. So basically, it's great to have this document, which will be, it's a high-level overview of what's happening in the county, which is great. And then we're going to go forward with many more specifics about how do we actually get charging into these communities for multifamily, for low income, for our missing middle, which is largely in Novato, and for rural drivers. So it really ties in, takes this and gets much more deeply into responding to that RFP. It's for $15 million is the maximum amount. So we're working on that, and Congressman Huffman's office very, very engaged in this. So sorry, a lot of background, but this is a big space with lots happening. So first of all, I think overall the plan is great. It has a lot of really good information. I know we're talking about the REACH codes next, but I think I would like to see in the plan, rather than just saying beyond, beyond the state codes, really that Marin goes for the highest REACH codes possible, because that's absolutely essential. There's no way we're going to reach our goals and tell folks in multifamily, well, we had an opportunity to give you, total access to charging, but we didn't want to adopt it for various reasons. Another thing the plan points out is proliferating charging in shopping centers. Right now, Measure B funding for TAM is for public access on public land only. It'd be great if perhaps TAM or the board of TAM considered whether that also might be available in public access. The new federal funding coming through is for infrastructure installed at private property that's available for public access. So it'd be great if we could align our county's funding with that. I don't know whether that's possible or not. That was discussion a while ago. Fleet to 100% is great. I'll talk a little bit more about awareness campaigns, how they really have to be tied to the infrastructure. Right now, they're kind of isolated, just about EV education, but really making sure that it's tied to the infrastructure itself. And it's excited to see some of the new technology in there as well. I think one thing we're really missing out on is the importance of storage at some of our key charging infrastructure sites, because there's a lot of concern, rightly so, about cost as well as resilience when there's a power outage, that people know that there are some kind of emergency areas that they can go, that there's storage as well. Some of the things that I will express criticism about, I think some of them are high level, not just about this plan, but about all the climate action plans. I think there's a lot of frustration in the nonprofit sector as well as staff and even at the jurisdictional level, that we have a lot of plans, but we don't actually have the money or the staff time to really implement these plans. And I know there was some discussion about finding funding, but it's really, it's overall, we do a lot of planning, but if we don't identify the specific tactics, because staff at cities, jurisdictions are fully busy already, including our sustainability officers. We also don't talk much about workforce development, which is important in this growing sector. Let's see, I think also, we talk a lot about fleets in the plan, which is great and, important to do, but there's really, passenger vehicles are the primary source of emissions. So I'd really like to see more details about how we really address that market in greater detail, specifically as we're looking at rolling out new infrastructure. One of the things we found is like there's this great new infrastructure at the schools, and a lot of the parents thought that it was coming from the school money, from the actual budget of the school, where it was funded, in other ways. So really tying that in. And the final thing I'll say, in working with the Canal Alliance and North Bay, there's lots of concerns about what are the policies and programs we put in place that that address unintended consequences that may come from this, like rent increases or gentrification. So I think we need to look more deeply at those things as well. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Carlene. Derek McGill, do you want to make any comments or?
No, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for your feedback. It's been a long process to develop this plan or strategy in partnership with our cities and reflecting what we're hearing on behalf of what our city staff need to deliver and meet the city goals in electrification. So feedback's been great. I really appreciate all the comments so far, and looking forward to getting this across the finish line. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Derek. Next up is Sebastian Kahn, MCE Clean Energy. Sebastian.
Hey, Bob, can you hear me okay? My internet's cutting out a bit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We can hear you.
Great. Well, just wanted to say thank you to Christine and Derek and Carlene. And Carlene, congratulations on the appointment to that federal EV working committee. That's great news. I just wanted to say
it's a nomination by Congressman Huffman, not appointed. Hopefully will be.
Nomination.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Well, congratulations nonetheless. I wanted to say, from one of the bullets that Christine raised about grid capacity as it relates to EV charging, I would encourage this group and all of us within this community to refer to that in terms of grid, like distribution capacity, as opposed to grid capacity. When we're talking about grid capacity, that's the overall health of the shared electric grid for the state of California, right? On a transmission level, a distribution level, from a regulatory perspective. I think as it pertains to installing EV charging infrastructure in our communities, we need to use the verbiage distribution capacity instead, because that refers to individual circuits, right? Like if there are upgrades that need to be made to a substation, if there are upgrades that need to be made to a transformer, that is something that needs to be coordinated with the utility. And I think we risk losing folks if we're saying there are overall grid capacity issues, if that makes sense, and happy to expand on that a bit, but I think the verbiage becomes important.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sebastian, for that clarification. Rob Rudell?
Oh, hi. Just have a basic question. Could be for anyone. Thanks for your presentations and for the work you do, by the way. So, as we know, a problem with adoption and even or use and even buying cars is the travel corridor in California, where there's a lack of reliable fast chargers. For instance, like I have to take a gas car to Santa Barbara next week because I can't figure out a reliable way to recharge on the way down. So, two questions. One is, or one question is, the County of Marin in its plan considering installing those kinds of chargers on the 101 corridor for people who pass through the county, or is that not part of it? Or is the corridor charging strictly a state thing?
Can I respond to that, or should I?
Sure.
Charlene, you can feel free to take the lead on that one.
Okay, yeah, so the federal money is called the NEVI, National EV Infrastructure Plan, and the DOT and federal highways, they have issued proposed minimum regulations. So those will be in effect in the coming weeks. Then the $5 billion of the $7.5 billion will go to Caltrans. California has already submitted their deployment plan. And then so the CEC and the Caltrans is the lead. And then the funding will be distributed throughout the state. So, and that's for highways and corridors specifically. And then there's the $2.5 billion I was speaking about earlier for community charging.
Okay, so it's coming, but just it's a state and federal thing.
Yeah, exactly. It has to kind of go through these filters.
And just to add on to that, the eventual implementation will be done by private vendors. They'll be able to seek funding at a statewide level for installation of those chargers. It won't be flowing to local jurisdictions for funding. We are closely monitoring that plan. Highway 101 and Highway 1 in Marin County are not considered built out and are therefore eligible for funding. And I think that has big implications for specifically for Highway 1, where there's a noted lack of EV charging equipment to access our national parks and recreation areas.
So Bill, and then I'll deal with some comments in chat. Bill Kearney.
Yeah, hi, good morning. Thanks, Christine, for all the good work and the long work you've been putting into this. I'm really gratified to see that the robust community outreach and education was the first category that you addressed. And, you know, that seems so important that outreach to actual consumers to boost their adoption rates is fundamental to us achieving our goals. And then broadly also, you know, I think the state, some significant things have happened on a state level in the last just month or so. So I'm hopeful that this strategy, when it reaches councils, will have Marin's nesting into that state framework as a primary frame for this strategy, so that in adopting the strategy, both decision makers and the general public feel like they're really part of something that is statewide and is going to make the sort of dramatic changes that the state goals set forth. On the education part, just a couple of points, I think, as you reach out to people. One is this persistent statement about EVs costing more than other vehicles. I think that really needs to be parsed out, and including operating costs, et cetera, so that we stop putting that, you know, if not now, soon to be false narrative out there. And it's so entrenched that it's a major thing that we need to stop saying and figure out how to say it in ways that really convey the cost benefits of EV ridership. And then also on the battery backup question, that's high on everybody's mind right now. And I think the strategy should include some reference to vehicle to home charging capacity, which is right on the verge of happening and becoming widespread, and could be very significant as a selling point for the adoption of EVs. And then finally, I think educational efforts targeted in some specificity to public decision makers to make sure that they're really up to speed on all the nuances, and also car dealership staff, another weak point in the adoption process. And finally, fleet managers within not only public jurisdictions, which is at least in San Rafael been sorely behind, but also in private fleet management for larger companies. So thanks very much for all the good work.
Great. So there are a couple of comments in chat, two from Kurt Johnson that pertain to serving Marin's two low income communities, Canal and Marin City. Kurt, do you want to make a statement?
Well, yeah, thanks. And the next step needs to be some planning. The report states the number of vehicles, but it doesn't actually talk about which specific vehicles are owned by the different municipalities, and different vehicles have different capacity to do bidirectional charging. So we want to get to a world where, we are, as a matter of policy, urging the municipal governments locally to not only go all electric, but plan and assume that those would also serve as local energy resilience assets to the extent practical. And that would lead to a preference to, right now the Nissan Leaf and others are specifically designed to be bidirectional and specifically designed to serve as energy resilience assets. So I think that needs to be incorporated into the guidance that goes to local governments as they consider their EV acquisition, and then also their planning. You can sort of envision a world where, as these fleets get bigger and bigger, you could do some energy analysis and say, hey, if we have enough of these things sitting in, say, our parking lot, I live in San Anselmo, that they could essentially replace the diesel genset that's sitting behind the San Anselmo, town council. And that could become the de facto norm as the first place to go for energy resilience needs as we encounter more PSPS events. So there's a lot that could be done, I think, in this space of thinking more holistically about how to integrate these as energy resilience assets. I'll be putting together a comment to that effect, submitting it back to Christine, and welcome feedback from all of you and how to most sort of effectively make that happen. Thank you.
Thanks much, Kurt. Susanna?
Yeah, thank you so much, Christine, for all your work. I really appreciated some of the simpler things in the document, the putting signs on EVs so that they're recognized. I've asked, I'm on the San Anselmo Climate Action Commission, and I've asked for our EV fleet to have signs on them so people start identifying that these are electric vehicles and they become more normalized. And Nissan, we have 3 Nissan Leafs, and Nissan just announced that they have approved their Leafs for bidirectional charging. And the one charger they've approved is from Fermata. So that is a really exciting development that San Anselmo is now going to be able to use their EVs to back up energy and then use it during the 4 to 9 hours when things are more expensive and a lot of dirty energy comes on. The other thing I wanted to emphasize is how important it is to have strong EV reach codes, especially right now when California and every jurisdiction is mandating new houses to miss this opportunity to have a significant number of EV chargers, especially multi-unit dwellings, is really significant. And even, there's been some talk even among the California Cal Green Tier 1 and Tier 2 that they don't go far enough. And I think they're actually doing some reconsideration of that. And so adopting a really strong model reach code that, for equity, that we give renters the same opportunity to charge at home that homeowners have. I mean, we cannot have equity if a homeowner has, a ready receptacle to plug in a charger, but renters have only 35% of the spots having a ready receptacle. So I'm really strongly advocating for a very strong REACH code that provides, at least 100% EV capable. There's a model Bay Area REACH codes that has some really significant requirements that are 85% low level 2 chargers, and then the rest is EV capable. So I really feel like that's the sort of model REACH code we should be asking for, to provide an equitable transition to EVs. Otherwise, it's just not equitable, in my opinion. So thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Chris, you have your hand up? You're on mute. There we go.
Oh, sorry. Christine and Carlene and Derek, thank you for your leadership. I wanted to talk about workforce development and the plumbers and the electricians and the installers and the proposal writers that are going to really support the installation of not only our charging stations, but the solar rooftops and storage and bidirectional gear. You might be aware of the County Board of Supervisors 2 weeks ago approved the county's first economic development plan in its history. There are 5 initiatives associated with that economic plan over the next 10 years. And one of them is to support our clean technologies and to really push for those various subsectors in workforce development and infrastructure and funding. We need, as a community, really support those efforts. And the county's got some unallocated money for economic development. And I'm going to be sort of encouraging them to be allocating some things. But I wanted to get Carlene and Christine's opinion about the workforce that the county needs that will install these various components, not only for EVs, but for just general building electrification, because they're oftentimes in the same proposals and in the bids and the installations.
I can jump in on that. So for the federal funding, the $7.5 billion that's coming from the federal government, they do address workforce development. In the industry, it's very widely known that we are not going to have sufficient workforce that's trained on that's trained to install and repair and maintain these stations. So that is addressed in the federal government. It's called the NEVI plan. There is the federal government hasn't released the minimum regulations that's in a proposed state. We all have submitted comments on those. One of the contentious things is whether for repairs, whether that needs to be a licensed electrician or whether that could be somebody that's had technical training but isn't a licensed electrician. Many of the tasks don't require necessarily a licensed electrician, and it will certainly open up the doors much more broadly to more workforce development in the very short term, that people could go on potentially become licensed electricians. So that's something that is being addressed. There's in that funding.
And that's at a federal level, Carlene?
Correct.
And what are the sort of the channels or the mechanisms that are going to happen so that it trickles down to a county or municipal level?
Yeah, so that's to be seen. If the comment period's already closed, but the federal government is deciding now about the minimum standards, then it goes to the state. So we've provided some comments already to the state deployment plan, but then it will go through the minimum regulations at the state level. So there's kind of this sequencing, And I could, it's in the federal document that's 650 pages, but there is workforce development addressed in that. So we'll see how the federal government comes forward, and then it's time to kind of lobby the state level to make sure that there's adequate workforce development in the program.
And
Mhm.
just to add on to a little bit of this and take it in a little bit of a different direction, I think within our equity community conversation here in the EV space, this has come up at least internally at TAM of what our tactics are and how do we approach these communities. There's a lot of desire for, Marin and Marin City and the Canal neighborhood to be leaders in addressing equity in this space. And we're hearing that from a lot of outside parties. We haven't really had the conversations directly with those communities to understand what their needs are. And so
Mhm.
one way of having that conversation with those communities is through this item of workforce development. A lot of community-based organizations are not, minority supported or community of color focused. They're focused on poverty, anti-poverty programs, and workforce development is key to those core missions of those CBOs. So we think that there's opportunities here, at least for Marin governments, to facilitate this conversation and support, groups like Marin Economic Forum or the Builder Association to make sure that there are qualified workforce within this county. And that's a role government may play to sort of facilitate and grow those that workforce while having an answer to what do we do about electrification in our communities. We don't want to presume that our equity priority communities are just going to get deployed with chargers. There may be other strategies or solutions for how they see the electrification happening in their communities. And I think we need to be responsive to those groups in whatever fashion they provide us input. So just a little add-on about the linkage to the equity priority communities with the workforce development.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. There's a good case, I think, for even MCF and other local foundations and grantors around unserved populations and training. About 4 years ago, VenturePad, my organization, hosted the training of a number of underserved, fairly youthful populations in training them around web development. And MCF funded about 30 scholarships to teach young people, again, who weren't in college necessarily or just didn't quite have the money. Gave them all scholarships. They ran through about a 9-month program here at VenturePad and got out, trained in about 5 different programming languages. And they got snapped up all within a month or two with local employers and, doing web development and front and back end work, and very successful. That was organized by Dream Corps, which is out in Oakland, Van Jones's organization. So I think we can also look to MCF or some others in conjunction with some of our nonprofits who might be able to organize a curriculum and then supported again by Marin builders or some of the unions. But we do have cases where we can get some local money and specifically target scholarships for folks that want to get into these fields.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris.
Yeah.
So folks will realize that we're talking about EV acceleration and not building reach codes. We're reaching out to our speaker, Brian Reyes, who we've been in close contact with, including an hour spent with him earlier in the week. So he's very much into this. I'm not quite sure what happened, but this does leave an opportunity for us to talk a bit more about the EV acceleration plan. And Jody, you had a comment in chat, and you want to ask a question or make a comment?
I do both, I think. I'm very appreciative of the acceleration plan. I think it's got some real strengths in it. because it aligns with a lot of our caps, some of us anyway, some of our cities have already prioritized a lot of these things. I mean, supporting the strategy, I think, is great, but some of us are already trying to get very specific about some things. Certainly Ride and Drive Clean as a nonprofit has been hugely helpful in the last few years in helping with the promotion and EV and car and bike shows, etc. So I know that to some degree that task has been handed off through TAM to this other firm. So I'm very curious what they're doing and when we're going to sort of see some county-wide promotion of those, because we can put things in our little town newsletters, but we need overall education and outreach. And I think we also really do need, I just want to support what Kathleen put in around in our local towns. We need some advice and some support around where to actually place some chargers, where the network for the county, where those need to be, so that we can get specific in asking and seeking funding to get those built and put in place. So those are a couple of my comments.
Sure, I'm happy to answer those to the best of my ability here, Jody. Those are great, and I appreciate the focus and target here. I want to start with the easy one, which is the support for jurisdictions on location of charging stations. In 2019, TAM did a study basically reviewing all the parking lots within the county as comprehensively as we could, and identifying those that had electrical conduits and information or electrical opportunities to tap into. So we've actually done a lot of that legwork for our jurisdictions already, and maps available on our website under our Alt Fields program, and it lists out every public parking location opportunity that we could find in the county. And there's a lot of opportunities within that space. The question really comes down to sort of what are the cost-effective ones to move forward with. Not every EV charging installation should be moved forward. Even in high usage locations, if it's $70,000 for 2 chargers or $100,000 for 2 chargers, we might be thinking about, where to put a bike rack or some other installation that supports clean transportation instead of spending that type of money on a very limited charger installation. So that base information has been provided to the jurisdictions, and they should be working through that and prioritizing which ones they want to move forward, which is getting back to the EV acceleration strategy. One of the issues cities should have in their capital improvement programs identified where their priority locations are, what's in the pipeline for development. So I think that's something all of us can help and continue to support our jurisdictions in. On our outreach firm, as many of you know, TAM did retain an outreach firm last year to develop our outreach efforts. And those are really keyed on 3 main goals, which is accelerate public agency EV charging infrastructure, accelerate our public agency fleet rebate program, and then we've revised our last goal to really focus on promotion of programs and opportunities for EV outreach and EV adoption within our county. So that can be things like promotion of state or regional programs that may provide additional incentives for our communities in the county. So we are currently been drafting Reach has been working closely on a lot of the admin and development of those lists of who are our school district champions, who are our water district and sanitary district champions, and how do we get contact with them on a regular basis? Which police and fire departments do we need to be reaching out to? Who operates the yellow school buses? How do we get those people engaged? A lot of that back end type work that's really instrumental within the public agency sphere to make sure we're getting our rebate adoptions up. In addition to that effort, they've been supporting us with a rather new process that we undertook over the last year, which is our EV project concept solicitation, which is a pretty robust effort that is been really unique and being modeled by MTC and San Joaquin COG and Sacramento COG. It's really taken off in terms of a process for government agencies to replicate statewide. So we're pretty pleased about that. So they've been supporting us and facilitating that conversation and doing some of the analysis on that end as well. And then primarily they've been focusing on an outreach plan development, and that's been starting with equity research. What is equity in this space, and what does that mean to different agencies? So utilities to nonprofits to groups like MCE, the CCAs, to mobility agencies such as TAM. What is that range of equity effort going on in the space, and looking at that closely, and then developing what equity could look like within those EPCs, our equity priority communities, to really begin that conversation with CBOs and go in with a strategic approach that's not, presumptive, but can potentially pay dividends in the short term and long term with accelerating EV adoption and electrification of transportation in all forms in our equity priority communities. So that's some of the work that's been done to date. It's been on the back end, and we think that that is going to gear us up for a pretty exciting program over the next year that I'd be glad to talk about at a later date. We are taking that forth to our TAM board with some of the more concrete public-facing activities expected for the next year, and that conversation will be this Thursday at our TAM board for those who are interested.
Okay. Ken Strong, you've been in touch with Brian Reyes, our speaker on building electrification. Why don't you update us?
Yeah, and it's possible that Brian just joined under my name the meeting. I'm not quite sure about that. He had a bit of he had a family emergency, but I think he may be able to join us. If not, I could start the discussion. There he goes. That is Brian. Wonderful.
Okay, terrific.
Brian, thanks so much for making, managing to get to the meeting. We really appreciate it.
So Ken, Carlene, you had your hand up for quite a while. Do you have something that you can add that would be in a minute or two, just to finish off?
Yes, just I'll try to be brief about this. Chris, in terms of workforce development, just so you should know that we've hired somebody from our Spanish-speaking community to do EV infrastructure testing in Marin County, and looking at it from Spanish-speaking and English as second language perspective, how they're going to use that charging infrastructure. So that's underway. We've also met with the president of Marin Community Foundation about this community grants opportunity. That's $15 million. So we're in discussion with them as well. So we should talk more about that.
Thanks. Yeah.
And then also, curbside charging is one of the things that is mentioned in this plan. It's super complex because of if we want to use street light charging, because of the way it's structured with MDSA, we met with them as well. And just also in terms of our equity communities, as I mentioned, we're doing a lot of work, unfortunately, outside of Marin. We'd like to do it in Marin as well, but in Pittsburgh, Oakland, and San Jose, where we have funding through the Air District, and we've been doing listening sessions and planning. So we at some point would like to be able to bring that, everything we've learned from those lessons for the past year into Marin at some point as well. So thanks.
Okay, so thank you, Carlene. Ken, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Although it's not clear whether Brian may have just dropped off, but hopefully he can join us back on. So the second segment was, oh, Brian, wonderful. And hope everything's okay. So Brian is a climate sustainability planner from Marin County's Community Development Agency, and has led the effort in order to develop these model reach codes that are now have been released and are going to be considered by Marin County and the towns and cities within Marin. Brian, why don't you take it away from there if you can?
Sure, thanks, Ken. And sorry, everyone, for being late. I had my child had to go to the emergency room in the morning, but everything's all good. Just had to scatter in the morning. So thank you for the patience. Okay, so I'm going to try to breeze through the original slide deck very quickly. And what this is it's an update to what I think a lot of you have been engaged with or knew about since when I first presented, I believe, to MCL in February, and ongoing stakeholder engagement since then. So this is sort of a summary of what has transpired. But first, we got to start sort of with the why. So just give me a second as I pull up the slide deck. Okay. And let me know if you see it. All good?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we're gonna start from the beginning. And you just see the slide deck, or do you see? Okay, great.
Mhm.
So yeah, as I said, it was an update from when we started our engagement in earnest early this year. And we started with the cost of failing to act is great. And the county and towns and cities and us have shared interest in either mitigating or adapting to climate change. So we all have launched our climate action plans, right? Every one of us have made obligations, made declarations, put forth policy. And a lot of it has to do with, on the mitigation end, is by 2030, somewhere between 40 to 60% reduction, and carbon neutral by 2045. What this shows is that on the red line, that our current path to reducing emissions, at least in the building sector, I'm just going to focus in on that. If we wait long, it's more difficult to intervene, as you see with the yellow dash line there. In the ideal world, that gray steady progress, like, hey, we're going down to 2050, or in this case, 2045, but that never really happens. And the way we only get there is through proactive empowerment and engagement. And so a lot of you have been engaging since then. One thing that I covered with particularly buildings is this idea of stranded assets. And with gas infrastructure, the cost of doing policy can, in the near future, or the cost of building can be heavily affected by the policies we set forth. And so obviously the state has put forth standards. It's no mystery that us here in Marin want to go above and beyond. So the cost of building just gets, as we know, other things affect that. But the gas infrastructure, we put that in, we're tying that in for the next 30, 50 years. And if we're all electrifying, who's going to hold the gas bag at the end of the day? For the ratepayers, they're going to have to spend more. For the realtors, they're going to having these assets like, okay, we need to start converting these, so that's going to be more expensive. And same goes with EV infrastructure. So we also see in the near future, in the mid and long term, that gas infrastructure is going to be stranded assets. So that's a huge risk. When we get to our green building codes here, I think a lot of you have seen this, but the upshot is in the blue. During the last building code cycle, the current codes we are in the blue, us and unincorporated and Mill Valley and San Anselmo took the most aggressive path, in which, where it says electric preferred, we did electric incentivized options. In the green, we have Novato, San Rafael, Tiburon. They took sort of a no electric preferred or incentivizing it, but they took tier 1, which is sort of the non-energy and EV infrastructure related reach codes. But Tiburon and Fairfax excluded, for example, went tier 1, but excluded energy efficiency requirements. Since, as we know, Fairfax has gone all electric. And in the gray down there, we had Belvedere, Corte Madera, Larkspur, Ross, Sausalito, remaining at the minimum code for the state. So what this is saying is that we had such a diversity of codes. So one thing we set out to do is like, well, we need to, as best as we can, be consistent across jurisdictions. So that was a goal. The other reason why that has impacted why we are about to launch these type of reach codes this in 2022 is that our most aggressive, the county, Mill Valley, and San Anselmo, when we studied and looked at permits, that our electric preferred actually didn't really, as much as we had liked to, the electric preferred reach codes did not significantly drive all electric adoption in new construction projects. So at an 11% adoption rate for new construction. And then for the mixed fuel, we see gas and electric, that was 67%. We had a quote from an architect that said, 9 out of 10 people just want their gas. So we felt like we needed to compel this time around, and I think we all feel that way. When we set out to endeavor a model reach code, a prototype, we had two goals. As you recall, we wanted to develop these reach codes for new construction as well as renovations by this fall, which is coming up soon, and adopt uniformity as best as we can across all jurisdictions. So I'm going to breeze through this really quickly, but Title 24 is your base code standards, and you have these two sections, Part 6 and Part 11. Part 6 being the energy related code, and Part 11 is sort of the non-energy. And so that's the state level, and they set the minimum standards. The county, city, and town, us, local jurisdictions, can set our own building codes. We can either adopt the minimum from the state, or deviate from their standards, or go above and beyond. Here in Marin, we tend to go above and beyond and deviate for sure. As you see at the top there, we have, those are the green building standards, right? For Title 24. If you break off to your left in the blue, Part 6 is sort of the energy codes. And then you break off to the right there in the yellow, we have these non-energy related codes. And the one that we focus on for green building standards is Part 11, AKA you hear Cal Green. In Cal Green, there's 4 different sort of sections, maybe 5, but the gray ones there, that environmental quality, water efficiency conservation, material conservation, and resource efficiency, are sort of standards that buildings have to meet, and they all lie in there, but we're not focusing on that. And the green is planning and design, and that's where a lot of the EV infrastructure codes lie. All right. Oops. I don't know if I am. Whoa. Okay. I'm going to get to the chase here. So I'm skip ahead a little bit. And so what we set out to do, well, I'll back up. What we set out to do is during 22 to require all electric for new construction, explore that, and then explore requiring additional energy efficiency and electrification required for single family and as well as multifamily. So that's what we started with in February. And considering the legacy that we had here in Marin of decarbonizing over 2020 or for 22 years, we have here new construction renovations and appliance changeouts. So in new construction between 2001 and 2018, we've had energy efficiency requirements that have gone above the state standards, if the state even established it at the time. For renovations, there was no requirements, and for appliance changeouts, time of burnout, swaps, no requirements or incentives. It's accelerated since 2019, so we have that electric preferred option, as I mentioned. And then for renovations, we started giving incentives voluntarily, and whether it's a state or regionally, and here locally, more electrify Marin. And also we hone in on appliance and changeouts and swaps, incentives for voluntary electrification through Electrify Marin. So that's between 2019 and present. And so what we are landed on after exploring what I mentioned as our proposal is that, okay, we recommend that jurisdictions go all electric for new construction, and for renovations or additions and alterations of a certain size, that there's stronger energy efficiency and electrification measures that are going to be required. And there's a whole tool and compliance scheme there. For appliance changeouts, we're going to continue incentives, but currently we're studying what it would be cost and equity impact wise to require appliance changeout time of burnout policy. So that's currently being explored, and we'll launch that information, I think, by end of this year or beginning of next year. All right. So in summary, our proposed model reach codes, diving just a little deeper for new construction, is all electric. You just heard that. There's no additional energy efficiency requirements beyond what's required for the state for new construction. So this is all electric. And then all buildings newly constructed that is not previously occupied is going to be falling under this. with a variety of exemptions and exceptions, such as for food establishments, and among others. So there's a link that we'll provide to you all after, if you haven't already, that you can dig into what are all those exemptions and what do they mean. For renovations or for additions, alterations, we decided to only focus on single family projects. That makes up about 70 to 80% of our building stock. For multifamily, there was just a lot of unknowns, and there's a tension with sort of our housing goals. So we wanted to make sure that we just focus in on this first. So for single family projects, those greater than 750 square feet will fall under this this renovations reach code, with some exceptions. And then energy or electrification requirements, we'll be using the relatively easy to use compliance pathway that a project applicant can use, and that the specialist, whoever's applying, should be able to use. The state developed this flexible measures compliance tool, and it creates a table in which you could choose from a list of energy efficiency or electrification measures, and that adds up to an energy savings score, and you just got to meet that score. And then just to future-proof and make sure we're electric ready, we require that despite the size of your project, even for kitchen and laundry remodels, that there's going to be electric readiness requirements, as well as lighting requirements for all projects. Lighting so affordable and cheap these days, particularly, that it's no big deal. So those will be requirements across the board. Now, in the last tranche is the EV infrastructure reach codes. So for existing buildings, whether there's a panel upgrade and or parking lot modifications, we have a very specific Marin EV requirements that go above and beyond state tier standards, and put in EV readiness into those modified parking lots, or when a panel is upgrade, or what I just got educated on is panel optimization. So the remainder of part 11, the non-energy standards, are meeting state standards, and we would adopt those as tier 1. For new construction, for even EV infrastructure, for the large part, we are also saying right now, at least, is tier 1 CalGreen standards that goes above the state code. We're currently rethinking that right now, and it's likely that we're gonna rethink the tier 1 standards. I'm just doing a lot of research and diving in deep right now. More on that later. So to end it, that we launched on our website this Reach Code adoption package for the community. And so if you haven't already, just visit our website where the model reach codes land, up there in number 1. The link's right there. And you can see a summary of all the policy, and then actually the detailed summary if you want to dive in deep. Lastly is we opened up feedback. I think a lot of you have already seen this, but if you haven't, please, we have a survey that you can take here that you could, it should only take about 10 minutes to complete to get a response and provide feedback on the model reach codes. And I'll just end it right there, and thank you for the time, and thank you for the patience, and deep apologies again for being a little late here.
No, don't worry about that, Brian. That was great. So just a couple things that I'll start with. So first of all, everybody should try and take that survey. It's important to get numbers on record of those people who support the various aspects of this proposed reach code, so we can get them out, build up some numbers for showing that Marin County residents support these things. Brian, one thing on the renovations part of the proposed reach code, could you just say something about the cost effectiveness standards statewide, and how that relates to the specific energy efficiency and or electrification measures that fit in the table there?
Right. Sure. Before I answer that, just put in the chat the link to the survey, just in case you want to take it now or whatever, and then also all the supporting documentation to that is a second link. So cost effectiveness, there's in the compliance table for the existing buildings renovations for single family, we can only put forth measures that are proven cost effective. And the cost effectiveness is done by the state. So which each of those points add up to, so let's say, you know, you have to reach 12 points, have a combination of 10, 15, either energy efficiency or electrification measures. You have to add up to those points. Each one of those points equals 1 million BTUs in energy savings. So per year. So yeah, that's it. The states did the analysis, said it's cost effective. If it's not cost effective, I wouldn't be able to put it within that compliance table.
Thanks. So what's the timeline now for rolling these REACH codes out?
Right. So the jurisdictions, if they want to make these codes come into effect by January 1st, 2023, they're working on it right now. And so whether they have to do council study sessions, educate their council, town managers, planning directors, if they haven't been aware of it, that's what the staff have to do right now. And I'm personally working with any of the staff who request to do that. It's up to each jurisdiction again to adopt these codes in whatever direction they want. So for the county, our timing is October 18th is the first reading, and then we do a final adoption by November 7th. The jurisdictions from what I've been talking to that have been interested, at least they're working on that right now, and they'll do some first readings in November or even in October, and either adopt by November or December. So basically by the end of this year, everyone needs to adopt. It's pretty much ASAP. And I think we have maybe, what is it, September? It's probably like 3 council sessions left for the year.
Right. Is there any particular resource that people can look to find out when their local jurisdiction is going to be considering these things, so that they can, do reach out to city council members, et cetera? And
yeah, you're gonna have to, you just got to dig into the city or town website and calendar and when the council is going to meet. But the best, if you want it, the best thing you do is call the planners within each jurisdiction or the building officials. But actually, that may not even be the most useful thing that you can do as advocates. I think the best thing you could do is just talk to your council people right away, or the town managers if you have your connections. I think that's the best thing to do, is to say, hey, this is what I think should happen or not. And I think that's the best way to get movement. If your jurisdiction tends to, especially if your jurisdiction is sort of wavering on going one way or the other.
okay. At this point, I would open it up to other people who have questions. Brian, about the program, you can use the raised hand function or put it in chat.
I think Belle and Deirdre.
Okay.
Questions?
Great.
Yeah,
Belle?
thank you so much. So Mike, this is a dynamic time for the adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered what your experience has been with the problems you will find with the city council members.
Mm.
What are the arguments that seem to work well? What is there any general set of reactions that you found that can be worked on and thought about in advance, or do you find that every jurisdiction is different?
Oh, I think every jurisdiction is different. So is your question just like what will work, right, in terms of getting the ear of the council to listen?
Well, what arguments are used that are negative?
Well, something that, if I can say, is one thing that we are seeing across the board is concern about grid reliability. And so that is a big concern that needs to be addressed. And so also with costs. And so a lot of the perception is that, you know, as all of a sudden we're all gonna just put a bunch of appliances and electrify like tomorrow. And so, yeah, if you do that, you're gonna strain the grid. But what we're talking about is sort of phasing in electrification. So again, the slide where I had series of slides where I said this has been on the books in the county across California since 2001. We've been doing these reach codes, and so we see it as a phase. And we're in the phase of we incentivized, and now it was pretty obvious whether it's us or the state, we this year are likely to compel, and the market trends are there, whether it's the technology, the appliances, the policy, it's all there. So I don't know what the magic sauce is, other than I know what I hear a lot is grid reliability and costs. So you just kind of have to focus your messaging on that. Yeah.
Good.
Hey, Brian, real quick, if I could add to that piece, I need to jump at 10:30, but I thought it was important.
Please. I was thinking of you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. You know, I think with the grid reliability concerns, those are definitely valid. You know, we saw the flex alerts last week and the need to conserve power. But I think what we also need to consider is that the load serving entities like MCE and PG&E even as well are forecasting electric demand 5, 10, 15 years into the future. And we're already accounting for building electrification, right? This is not, you know, as Brian put it, it's not something as if we're all going to flip the switch and be all electric tomorrow. It's going to be a gradual transition. And I think all of the, you know, power providers throughout the state are accounting for that type of thing, right? And in light of the recent flex alerts, I think we also need to consider that it was 118 degrees in parts of MCE service area. This was, you know, fingers crossed and an anomaly. Hopefully we won't have that temperature anytime soon, but it was an extreme heat event that caused some of the grid reliability concerns. So certainly don't want to be dismissive of the you know, reliability concerns from a load and demand perspective, but I think that we need to rethink how we're talking about that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian. And I'll repost our landing page for the Green Building Reach codes. We go to the FAQ section. We've already, and Sebastian, some of our steering committee have helped build that resource. So you're able to hopefully stem off some of those questions or at least be prepared to answer. So,
okay. Deirdre and then Sue.
Hi, I'm Deirdre Fennessy and I'm representing Resilient Neighborhoods today. Tamara would love to be here, but she cannot. I just want to say that this information is so exciting to us. Our mission has been for the last 10 years to reduce carbon emissions in residences, in particular in Marin. And these reach codes will do that. So this is very wonderful. And we have expanded our program to include pledges that people can make for that 2030 deadline. And we will be keeping track of who is doing what and how are they achieving this. And that information will be available to all our participants in our workshops in our toolkit, which they can access at any point. That toolkit has resources for people to electrify everything in their home and in their cars and all of the resources that they need, including the rebates and the discounts and the government programs. So we have found through calls that we've done this year to 206 of our graduates, of which we have 1,900, that 99% of the participants have completed and reached the goals that they had set during their work with us in Resilient Neighborhoods. And many of them are very optimistic about this new 2030 goal that we have made for them about making pledges into the future. And the information that you've given me today is really all about the future going forward. So to have this for them, and I'm anxious when that will be available, will really help them make their action plans going up to 2030. Resilient Neighborhoods has kept 11 million pounds of carbon dioxide out of the environment in the last 10 years. and we will continue to do that. And we are the ones who have that engagement that you just talked about that is so important in order to get people to make these changes. We will continue to support the electrification of Marin in all aspects and support Ride Clean, Drive Clean, Electrify Marin, and all of the other organizations and events in our newsletters and website. So thank you for doing this. This is really going to push us ahead in helping to cut more carbon emissions, the environment in Marin.
Thank
Thanks, Deirdre. And if I make a comment, the aspect I'm working on, and a lot of us are working on here, is sort of the operational carbon. That is sort of the carbon that we emit immediately directly here within the community. And thank you, Deirdre. I just want to remind everyone there's that larger pie of what we consume in the supply chains of outside of our emissions that we have a larger opportunity to affect. So thank you for your work. Just wanted to comment and give a call, shout out to embodied carbon and all that stuff. So anyways.
Just one question. What about the accountability for this? I mean, the demand is great, but what happens if it's not done? If the people don't, if the reach codes are approved and then the construction is not up to the standard that you are expecting. Yeah,
part of the building codes, the reason why you want to put it in building codes, those are the enforcement standards. They all have to, instead of, let's say, you can do this like Berkeley that has done it through zoning. The ban is through zoning. And so it's hard to enforce. With building codes, you can enforce directly. So endemically, that's how you hold people accountable, is in the building codes, because they have to abide by that standard in order to get the permit to continue. If they don't get the permit, it delays their project, it costs them money, or it causes them pain. So it's more of, using this traditional building code and permitting to enforce these electrification or energy efficiency requirements.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sue?
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. I'm just so amazed by all this work. And I feel really lucky to live in Marin County, where everyone is dedicated to, lowering emissions and addressing climate change. It's a lot of work, and I really appreciate it. And I just wanted to say about, energy, that, as everyone knows, all new homes require solar, and most solar companies will not install solar anymore without a battery. And also the price of solar, because of the Biden tax credits, is dramatically going down. And that, there's been a slowing of projects because of supply, demand, and COVID. But I think there's going to be a lot more solar and wind projects coming on very quickly, or, at least as fast as they can. And the other thing I wanted to say is that Ken Strong really helped me recently learn about these new CPUC rules. One is 29, that is going to dramatically reduce the price for EV charging infrastructure installed at new multi-unit dwellings, which is really exciting. They are going to pay for the electricity from the source to the meter. And then they also came out with a new decision just last month that will also reduce the price dramatically for charging infrastructure, that builders can now use a sub-meter to separate the electricity used for EV charging from the meter itself. So they no longer have to do a direct to unit billing, which was it's really costly and would have meant, a lot of them couldn't do it. So that's really, really exciting. And I just wanted to make people aware of that. If you do talk to developers, that the price for this has dropped dramatically. And there's also this new technology, I think it's called Orange Box, where they can put a small square box over the plug, and that will separately bill each tenant for their EV charging use. So there's a lot of exciting technology happening, and I'm very optimistic that it's much more affordable and something developers will want to do now. So thanks.
Thanks, Sue. And one other thing that the CPUC has done recently, or is in the process of doing, is historically the CPUC has there has been a rebate, if you will, to developers who install gas lines and gas appliances in homes. And the theory was that to encourage more gas use, because that would spread the cost of the infrastructure over a greater number of people. But the CPUC is now, in recognition of this need to go electric, they're ending those subsidies that or those rebates for installation of gas into new construction and additional gas appliances. So it's another thing, another reason why developers for new construction should be enthusiastic about going all electric.
And thank you for that information. I mean, I didn't realize that myself. I mean, I'm developing the codes, but these are things that I learned. So thank you all for your research, because we need to inform each other. So really appreciate it.
Okay, good. Carlene?
Yes, several things. Belle, you were asking about the city councils, and certainly I think it comes down to one thing is just industry lobbying against this, saying that it's just going to cost too much. This is what happened at state level with multifamily bill that was moving through the Senate and the House at state level, and basically it turned into, well, let's study this more because the building lobbied hard against this. So hopefully some of the new CPUC rulings will start to change that. But I think that that's something we really need to address at a city council level. I also wanted to mention to folks on this call, I know some of you are involved in the building electrification squad. I'm involved with several others on this, on the EV squad, that we get together and identify an advocate for each jurisdiction. We did this for AB 1236, which was the streamlining for EV permitting. Thank you. Yeah. So I think we should all jump on that and talk offline about it. Also, in terms of grid, I did put in the chat that, the new norm, of course, is extreme heat. And I've been attending conferences where a lot of utilities from all over the country are present. One of the things they've talked a lot about is the importance of EVs on the grid, and being able to help when we have energy crises, and also education around, we don't want everybody setting their timers for midnight to start charging, because that'll put an enormous amount of pressure on the grid, and also dealing with solar absorption, et cetera. So there's a lot for consumers to learn, things they've never thought about before that can also help with grid resilience. So
Thank you. Can I comment on that first part? And so yeah, okay, this is Brian stepping out of his Marin County role, but I will second, as I do, I live in San Francisco and I do advocacy here, and it's right on what Carlene said. I think really, Brian, outside the Marin County role, whatever you want to get, you got to advocate really hard. It's at this point in time, it's sort of to the council member. You're going to have to lobby hard, and I think you at each jurisdiction. And I know you all have set up infrastructure of doing that. So I just want to applaud it and keep saying, as an advocate, that you keep going in that direction. So yeah.
Okay. Two more questions, and then we'll move on to the discussions about the Inflation Reduction Act. Chris, and then Bill. And then
hey,
Bill.
Brian, Brian, good to see you again. Good work. Question around sheer numbers of single family buildings. Do you have a sense of how many we have in Marin?
The percentage, the share of single family.
How many single family resident buildings?
I don't know the count. I know that off the top of my head, but I know that across the county depending where you live, but if I'm average it overall, it's about 70 to 80% of the building stock
And what's our building stock?
of single family. Oh, sorry, of all the build between residential, non-residential, all our building stock, of which
Yep.
70 to 80 is residential, single family residential.
Do we have an idea of how many total buildings we've got in the stock?
Yeah, I can pull that up. And I can.
Is it like 100,000? Is it 50,000? I'm just curious.
Anyone have that off their top of their head? I can't recall. I did this analysis a long time ago. I just totally.
Right.
I could share that later, but
yeah, I
yeah.
mean, the reason why I'm asking this
Yeah,
is that's our sort of target customer, so to speak, right? In business speak. And what's addressable is another issue, but I would encourage you to really look at the target number of buildings, right? That we have to go after over the next 8 years or so, you know, whatever our time frame target is, and then really back out from that, you know, where we need to go in terms of adoption curve, right? So if you look at a target group that we need to migrate, we need to get them aware, interested, considering, you know, the acquiring of a bid, actual budget, and purchase, and then installation, right? So it's a sequence, and we can have a funnel associated with all those stages to get to a target number. So if we would say, you know, we got 50,000 single family residences. We need to, a reasonable target is 10% of those, right? Over the next 8-10 years. What's that all mean then in terms of outreach and marketing effort, you know, funding and actual people that can install this stuff? I don't know how many of you on this call have recently gone out to bid for a heat pump, or for a, you know, water cooler or water heater, or you know, electric stovetop, but the response rate and the professionalism is pretty poor out there among many of the contractors for these conversions. So we need to address that as a piece of friction in this you know, in this process. So I don't know if anyone else has a comment about that. Just the sheer numbers of facilities we need to convert, and how we do that.
Thanks, Chris. Bill? Carney?
Yeah, hi. Hi, Brian.
Hi.
So I wanted to circle back to the two barriers that you identified, you know, as really linchpins to the advocacy that that we need to do. So you identified cost and grid reliability. And just to zero in on those, get a little more information for us. I think it'd be really useful, and maybe this is already in the material somewhere, to have a succinct chart of the actual costs now, and factoring into that both installation for the various different kinds of appliances we're talking about, and also the operational savings that might accrue from that, or costs. So that we go in well armed to counter that generic response from public officials of, oh, it's going to cost too much, you know?
Right.
So that would be really helpful. And also to factor into that the incentives that are available, funding, and particularly the brand new stuff that's just come out of the federal legislation that is now in hand. You know, what do those costs look like with those incentives? Because that's a really big change versus when the ordinance was being developed. So I think that we need to be up to speed on that when it hits councils. And on the grid reliability, you know, again, you know, there's a lot of mythology out there about that. Right. And we've talked here today about EVs being a source of addressing that, et cetera. So I think providing us with that information would be really, really critical. And maybe just a couple of comments right now. And I do hope that as you do your staff report for the 18th, that those things are really highlighted up there so that we come armed with that information, both to the board and also to our own municipalities. And then finally, I'm really looking forward to next year when you turn your attention to appliance change out, which is where the real impacts can be made.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, thank you. And we do have, again, in those FAQs, but I'll send Ken, and he can circulate it to address how we address grid reliability and cost. I don't have a breakdown of a chart as a table, but we have some talking points for sure. And regarding appliance chain out, I think through that grand jury report, personally, I think it's smart to do a countywide electrification plan. So just matters who's going to staff it and make that happen. But I think that will help us understand sort of what's the next steps after hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers that a majority of us have gone at least all electric for new construction.
Plan and ordinances.
Yeah, I'm not even going to say plan, I'm going to say an implementation.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Brian, for this really clear and helpful comments, and particularly given a clearly difficult morning for you. But with that, I think we're going to finish up this part of the meeting, and I believe the last part of the meeting is Bell Cole and Jim Burrows are going to give us an idea as to at least some of the portions of the Inflation Reduction Act that relate to some of the other topics we've been talking about today.
Bob?
Before we start that, so this meeting is run later than planned for the first two scheduled segments. So we had planned to have a presentation on various elements of the Inflation Reduction Act as a kind of introduction to a longer discussion we're going to have at the October Climate Action Working Group meeting. Unfortunately, this is going to have to turn out to be more of a teaser for the next meeting than an actual full-on presentation. Apologies to Bell and Jim, who I know have been working on this. Bell?
Yeah. So, well, you know about the Inflation Reduction Act, HR 5376, and it covers everything but $370 billion for basically GHG reductions over 10 years. And so we have preliminary observations to this landmark legislation. One is that the IRA, I'll just call it that, the IRA authorizes tax credits, rebates, grants, and loans to incentivize a collection of greenhouse gas emission reduction programs. And so I'll just give you, just right off the top, some of the financial incentives and funding that they cover. Tax credits and rebates for cost of energy efficient improvements in the home, tax reductions for energy efficiency improvements to commercial buildings that reduce total annual energy costs, tax credits, grants, loans to finance new and existing renewable power generation, including hydro and nuclear power stations and transmission lines, R&D money to finance new clean technology, for example, carbon capture and sequestration, green hydrogen for fuel strategies, funding for clean energy workforce training, block grant funding for GHG emissions reduction projects in low-income communities, tax credits for financing clean fuels and vehicles, and funding for nature-based climate solutions for agricultural conservation, safeguarding forests and rural development, and also drought relief. And then the second point we want to make is that IRA is expected to result in roughly 40% reduction of GHG emissions below 2005 level by 2030. And Biden's goal of 50% reduction, we're thinking that the expectation is that states and local governments will be able to supplement the 40% IRA reductions to meet that 50% overall goal. And IRA costs financed by significant new corporate tax measures. And another thing we want to point out, the concessions were made in the end to ensure Senate passage, including more oil drilling on federal lands in the Gulf of Mexico and the Alaska coal inlet. So I'm now going to pass it on to Jim for another set of points about this bill.
Yeah, good morning. This is Jim Burrows, and we are going to have to defer much of the detailed or high-level discussion of this bill until next month, I think. But just to give you a sense for it, 273 pages for the in the bill itself. There's a lot there, a lot yet to be worked out, to be understood about the bill, and to recognize that it's going to take some time for many of these programs to actually roll out. Tax credits that might come into play, they will come into play in January 2023, but rebates and grants and that have to be funneled pursuant to the Inflation Reduction Act through the states, that's going to take, well, let's call it at least several months to play out, I would think, before those kind of monies can become available to incentivize the kind of energy efficiency programs that are really covered here in the IRA. So there's a lot there. It's going to take a lot of expert analysis to understand exactly what is there and how to take advantage of it and how to move forward ahead with it. And perhaps more discussion of that next month to flesh some of that out.
So we'll definitely have much more discussion next month. We're working on that program now. And
Bob, I just want to say one thing about that is that not only do we want to coordinate with Carleen about what her insights and experience can help us a lot in narrowing down how we want to bring this to the attention of everybody. Anybody else in this group who has thoughts about this legislation or have been given some thoughts, get back to us because we want to consult with you as well. Thank you.
And there have been a number of really interesting articles on this, dealing with aspects of it, and we'll do our best to get at least some articles and podcasts around. I will say this, as somebody who listens to a number of climate change related podcasts, I've never before heard the people who are being interviewed sounding giddy. And actually excited and happy. So this is a big deal.
Yeah, huge.
And so it's definitely worthwhile for us to spend time and figure out what the implications are, including for Marin. With that, I think what we should do is just wrap this up. We're at 10:58. And I want to thank folks for attending this, and I look forward to seeing you again at next month's Climate Action Working Group meeting. That's it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, everyone.